I run StoryCorps. Do people know what StoryCorps is? Some people, okay. Some. Okay, so for those of you who don't and want to know how fast they can get done so you can have lunch, it is a very simple idea. I used to make documentary radio programs and did a lot of stuff for many years in prisons and homeless shelters and housing developments, and saw that when I was in a prison on death row, when I interviewed a guy, and he talked about, his childhood or what his dreams were, that many times these guys had never been asked these questions before, and it could be important and sometimes transformative in their lives to have these conversations. So I did these documentaries for many years and had this idea to start StoryCorps about a dozen years ago, which essentially takes documentary and turns it on its head, because when Sarah does a documentary, you do a lot of interviews, and you put it on the radio so that many, many, many people can hear it, and that's the purpose of documentary work. But what I wanted to do was to say that the purpose of the work is actually to give as many people as possible the chance to be listened to. So we built a booth in Grand Central Terminal 13 years ago where you can bring anyone who you want to honor by listening to their story, a parent, a friend. You go to this booth and you're met by a facilitator, and you sit inside the soundproof booth for 40 minutes across from your grandmother, and you listen. Most people think of it as, if I had 40 minutes left to live, what would I say to this person who's so important to me? At the end of the 40 minutes, you get a copy of the interview, and another one goes to the Library of Congress so that your great-great-great-grandkids can get to know your grandmother through her voice and story. Started out as a crazy idea. Actually, at the beginning, nobody came to StoryCorps, but now that's changed. We've had about 250,000 people in America participate. And we also do broadcasts and NPR, and we do animations. And I like to think of the experience of StoryCorps, sitting there and being listened to, reminds people that they matter and that they won't be forgotten. And the broadcasts we do, I hope, speak to being able to walk in the footsteps of someone who almost by definition is different than you, and recognizing a little bit of yourself in that person. So I'm going to play a bunch of stories. Eric asked earlier, where is the hope narrative? So these are some hope narrative stories. We just launched a series called Who We Are, which is in the midst of the madness of this election season, a little ripple of hope that we're trying to bring to the country over social media with these optimized videos. This is, if you could put up the first slide. This is Julio Diaz, who's a social worker from the Bronx. He came to our original Grand Central booth to record an interview. He told this story about what happened one night when he was coming home from work on his way to eat at his favorite diner.
So I get off the train, I'm walking towards the stairs, and this young teenager pulls out a knife. He wants my money. So I just gave him my wallet, told him, here you go. He starts to leave, and as he's walking away, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, you forgot something. If you're going to be robbing people for the rest of the night, you might as well take my coat to keep you warm. So, he's looking at me like, what's going on here, And he asked me, well, why are you doing this? And I'm like, well, I don't know, man. If you're willing to risk your freedom for a few dollars, then I guess you must really need the money. I mean, all I wanted to do was go get dinner, and if you really want to join me, hey, you're more than welcome. But I'm like, look, you can follow me if you want. I just felt maybe he really needs help. So, we go into the diner where I normally eat. We sit down in the booth, and the manager comes by, the dishwashers come by, the waiters come by to say hi, So the kid was like, man, but you know everybody here. Do you own this place? I'm like, no, I just eat here a lot. He's like, but you're even nice to the dishwasher. I'm like, well, haven't you been taught you should be nice to everybody? So he's like, yeah, but I didn't think people actually behave that way. So I just asked him in the end, I'm like, what is it that you want out of life? He just had almost a sad face. Either he couldn't answer me or he didn't want to. The bill came, and I look at him, and I'm like, look, I guess you're going to have to pay for this bill because you have my money, and I can't pay for this. So if you give me my wallet back, I'll gladly treat you. He didn't even think about it. He's like, yeah, okay, here you go. So I got my wallet back. And I gave him $20 for it. I figure maybe it'll help him. I don't know. And when I gave him the $20, I asked him to give me something in return, which was his knife. And he gave it to me. It's funny because when I told my mom about what happened, no mom wants to hear this, but with her, she was like, well, you're the type of kid that always someone asked you for the time, you gave them your watch. I don't know, I figure, you treat people right, you can only hope that they treat you right. It's as simple as it gets in this complicated world.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you. I've actually never played that story publicly before. So 250,000 interviews. We have booths all across the country for people to participate in. We've done a bunch of big special initiatives through the years at StoryCorps. Our first was with 9/11 families. Everyone who lost a loved one on September 11th comes to leave a record of that person's life. We have an African American initiative, which is the largest collection of African American voices ever gathered. Our most recent initiative is called Out Loud, and this celebrates the stories, in particular, of LGBT folks who were alive before Stonewall, to document the kind of spiritual Holocaust, especially in small towns in the Deep South and rural areas. A lot of those stories are incredibly painful. Some of them are surprising. This is one of the surprising ones. This is Patrick Haggerty, who grew up the gay son of a dairy farmer in very rural Washington state in the 1950s. He came to StoryCorps with his daughter and told the story about a school assembly he performed at when he was a teenager.
I'm riding to school with my oldest brother, and on the way to school, I'm putting glitter all over my face. And my brother said, "What in the hell are you doing?" I said, "I'm putting on my costume." He said, "Well, I wouldn't be caught dead wearing that." So he dropped me off at the school, and he called my dad up, and he said, "Dad, I think you better get up there. This is not going to look good." So my dad drove up to the high school, and he had his farmer jeans on, and they had cow crap on them, and he had his clodhopper boots on, and when I saw him coming, I ducked around the hall and hid from him. And it wasn't because of what I was wearing. It was because of what he was wearing. So the assembly goes well, and I climb in the car, and I'm riding home with my father. And my father says to me, "I was walking down the hall this morning, and I saw a kid that looked a lot like you ducking around the hall to avoid his dad, but I know it wasn't you because you would never do that to your dad." And I squirmed in my seat, and I finally busted out, and I said, "Well, Dad, did you have to wear your cow crap jeans to my assembly?" And he said, "Look, everybody knows I'm a dairy farmer. This is who I am." And he looked me square in the eye. And then he said, "Now, how about you? When you're a full-grown man, who are you going to go out with at night?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "I think you do know, and it's not going to be that McLaughlin girl that's been making goo-goo eyes at you, but you won't even pick up the damn telephone. And I'm going to tell you something today, and you might not know what to think of it now, but you're going to remember when you're an adult, don't sneak. Because if you sneak like you did today, it means you think you're doing the wrong thing. And if you run around and spending your whole life thinking that you're doing the wrong thing, then you'll ruin your immortal soul." And out of all the things a father in 1959 could have told his gay son, my father tells me to be proud of myself and not sneak. My reaction at the time was to get out in the hayfield and pretend like I was as much of a man as I could be. And I remember flipping 50-pound bales 3 feet up into the air going, "I'm not a queer. What's he talking about?" But he knew where I was headed. And he knew that making me feel bad about it anyway was the wrong thing to do. I had the patron saint of dads for sissies. And no, I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now.
The beauty and the poetry and the grace and the wisdom that we can find in the stories of everyday people, of all of us, when we take the time to listen. When you have an archive as large as a StoryCorps archive, there are kind of amazing things that show up inside. When it was the 25th anniversary of the Challenger shuttle, we went and looked in the archive. And I should say, I just saw this statistic for the first time. You know, we look at every interview as equally valuable in people's lives, and we treat it as you know, an important, a sacred moment in people's lives. But some have this universality which makes them appropriate to share with a larger audience. So I think it's 0.04% of what we record that gets on the air. At the 25th anniversary of the Challenger shuttle, we went to see if anybody had come in to talk about the disaster. And it turns out that the brother of one of the astronauts had come to StoryCorps. Carl McNair had come to remember Ron McNair, who was an astrophysicist and one of the 7 astronauts who died when the shuttle exploded on January 28, 1986. Carl came to remember life growing up in Lake City, South Carolina with his brother.
When he was 9 years old, Ron, without my parents or myself knowing his whereabouts, he decided to take a mile walk from our home down to the library, which was, of course, public library, but not so public for black folks when you're talking about 1959. So as he was walking in there, all these folks were staring at him because they were white folk only, and they were looking at him and said, you know, who's this Negro? So he politely positioned himself in line to check out his books. Well, this librarian, she says, this library is not for coloreds. He said, well, I would like to check out these books. She says, young man, if you don't leave this library right now, I'm going to call the police. So he just propped himself up on the counter and sat there and said, I'll wait. So she called the police and subsequently called my mother. Police came down, 2 burly guys come in and say, well, where's the disturbance? And she pointed to the little 9-year-old boy sitting up on the counter. He says, man, what's the problem? So my mother, in the meanwhile, she was called. She comes down there praying the whole way there. Lord Jesus, please don't let them put my child in jail. And my mother asked the librarian, what's the problem? Well, he wanted to check out the books, and you know your son shouldn't be down here. And the police officer said, you know, why don't you just give the kid the books? And my mother said, he'll take good care of them. And reluctantly, the librarian gave Ron the books. And my mother said, what did you say? He said, thank you, ma'am. Later on, as youngsters, a show came on TV called Star Trek. Now, Star Trek showed the future where there were black folk and white folk working together. Right. And I looked at it as science fiction, because that wasn't going to happen, really. But Ronald saw it as science possibility. Mm-hmm. You know, he came up during a time when there was Neil Armstrong and all of those guys. So how was a colored boy from South Carolina wearing glasses, never flew a plane, how was he going to become an astronaut? But Ron was the one who didn't accept societal norms as being his norm. I mean, that was for other people. And he got to be aboard his own Starship Enterprise.
So much about, thank you. So much about StoryCorps, which is really, you know, collecting the wisdom of humanity and giving people a chance to talk about what's important. So much of it is about the fragility of life. I like to think of it as kind of, especially in the midst of all the nonsense that we're going through now in this country, is kind of shaking you on the shoulder every week when you hear it or if you participate and saying, you know, this is what's important. We released an app last year, which makes it possible. Up until then, you had to go to one of our booths around the country to record an interview with the facilitator, and it goes to the Library of Congress. We have an app now so that anybody can record anytime, any place. It walks you through the process. It gives you questions to ask, and then with one tap, you can upload it to the Library of Congress. We actually wanted to see if we could scale it last year, and over Thanksgiving, we created something called the Great Thanksgiving Listen, where we asked U.S. history teachers to assign their kids to record an interview with an elder over Thanksgiving and upload it to the Library of Congress. And we only had a couple of week run up and didn't know if it was going to work. Google was kind enough to put us on their homepage, but did a bunch of interviews leading up to it. Thanksgiving came, and on Thursday of Thanksgiving, nobody had uploaded a story. It was basically what we saw every day. And Friday of Thanksgiving weekend, it was about the same. Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend, same thing. And I started doing interviews saying, well, it didn't work this year, but we're going to try again next year because the importance of listening and you know, getting this into the fabric of the country. And then on Sunday night, we had given up. And I got an email from a colleague saying, you better look at what's happening on the app. And there were thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of stories coming in, 50,000 1001 Night, which was as many as we'd recorded in the first 10 years of StoryCorps combined, which speaks to another kind of piece of great human wisdom, which is that kids wait until Sunday night to do their homework. I'm gonna play one more story. This is actually unreleased. This is part of this Who We Are series that we came up with Steven Spielberg to blanket the country with these stories of hope. This is a very gentle story. It's a fourth grader named Aiden Sykes and his dad Albert in Jackson, Mississippi, very recently, having a conversation.
Do you remember what was going through your head when you first saw me?
I remember when the doctor pulled you out, the first thing I thought was that he was being too rough with you. And he actually held you like a little Sprite bottle, and he was like, "Here's your baby." That was the most proud moment of my life. Don't tell your brothers, because it's 3 of y'all. But it was like looking at a blank canvas and just imagining what you want the painting to look like at the end, but also knowing you can't control the paint strokes. You know, the fear was just, I got to bring up a black boy in Mississippi, which is a tough place to bring up kids, period. But there are statistics that say black boys born after the year 2002 have a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison. And all 3 of my sons were born after the year 2002.
So, Dad, why do you take me to protest so much?
I think I take you for a bunch of reasons. One is that I want you to see what it looks like when people come together, but also that you understand that it's not just about people that are familiar to you, but it's about everybody. Did you know the work that Martin Luther King was doing was for everybody and it wasn't just for black people?
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah, so that's how you got to think. If you decide that you want to be a cab driver, then you got to be the most impactful cab driver that you can possibly be.
Are you proud of me?
Of course. You my man. I just love everything about you, period.
The thing I love about you never give up on me. That's one of the things I will always remember about my dad.
You said it like I'm on the way out of here, or like I'm already gone.
So, Dad, what are your dreams for me?
My dream is for you to live out your dreams. It's an old proverb that talks about when children are born, children come out with their fists closed because that's where they keep all their gifts. And as you grow, your hands learn to unfold because you're learning to release your gifts to the world. And so for the rest of your life, I want to see you live with your hands unfolded.
Great expectations indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you.